Thank you for spending the next 45 minutes with us. My name is Andres Banet, and a pleasure to welcome my partner in crime, Jacques.
Hello, everyone. We're just going to give you a couple minutes to get ready as people are joining the session. And we'd like to start with the first question to see if the chat works for everyone, just to know where you're joining us from. So I'm assuming most people are coming from Brussels or Belgium, but feel free to drop in the chat your location at the moment.
Lebanon. Wow. Okay. Where else? Zagreb, Brussels, Bonn, Paris. Okay. Very diverse audience. So that's wonderful to have you from all over, and thank you for your interest and your curiosity when it comes to AI and how to use it for international organizations and EU agencies, EU institutions, basically public sector and public policy and in an international environment, international context. So with that, we will get started with the slides and a bit of housekeeping or a couple of words. So first, about how we come to talk about all these topics. So Jacques and I have been speaking about AI for public affairs, for strategic communications and public policy for about 2 years, and we've trained several thousands by now participants, and I've worked with various organizations, trade associations, UN foundations, private companies, and European Commission, or EU agencies of all sorts, always focusing on the practical way of using AI for your public affairs or public policy work. Jacques, do you want to take the housekeeping?
Sure. So this is obviously a session, part of our 3-day AI sessions. And we had 2 sessions earlier this week for pharma and life sciences, trade associations. And now today's a final day to talk about how to use AI for international organizations and EU agencies. And today's agenda is going to be really simple. So we're going to first start to think about what an AI mindset means for your organization, for your team. We're going to go through use cases that we've seen in our space that are really effective if you're trying to use AI and use different tools to write better, to write with more persuasion, or to simply be more effective in your work. And we're going to share some advanced prompting techniques and things that have worked for many of the participants of our workshops. And so hopefully by the end of the session, you'll have a better idea on how to apply AI to your work. And then obviously, if you have any questions, there'll be a little bit of time at the end to ask these questions. And feel free to also use the chat if you have any burning questions during the presentation. As a disclaimer, we will share some examples, and obviously maybe some AI answers may contain inaccuracies. So bear in with us here. The idea is to show you examples and to show you how to use AI, and hopefully you'll get a sense of the techniques and the ways to do so. The AI tools that we will be using are simply illustrative. So obviously you might be using Copilot or ChatGPT or Perplexity, but this doesn't really matter in this case. It's just about thinking about the mindset to have and not necessarily the tools that you should be using. If you have any questions, feel free to use the chat. All the slides and the recording will be shared in the session, after the session. So that's just a response to one of the questions as well in the chat. And this is going to be a fast-paced session, 45 minutes. So apologies if we're going fast through the slides, but the idea is to show as much value as possible before the end of the webinar.
So maybe to kick it off, to get your fingers warmed up and also to see your peers, what sort of input they give to this particular question, which is, what do you use AI for? So what is it that the practical daily or ad hoc use that you have found AI to be helpful and that brought you some added value? So please put that into the chat box, and let's see what inputs come in. And we have some hunches as to some questions that often come back. Hugo says to structure thoughts. That's a very good way of using AI to dump in various ideas and make it pull some red thread. help change complex technical content into plain language, indeed. So that's reframing things, scanning news from stakeholders, patterns, strategic documents, advice on shortening texts, indeed, creating image, videos, many other use cases for social media and brainstorming. So very good. We will share with you quite a few ideas around those topics, and hopefully the way you might go about it as of this session will give you much better responses and much higher quality results than what you might have, because a very common frustration with AI tools and the use of AI is just simply the response is too generic or inaccurate or just not in line with your expectations.
And we wanted to start with a fun example when we're using AI. And AI is a great tool to have as a conversation starter to better understand how your audience might be thinking about your organization. So to do some research on what specific types of audiences might think about what you do. So the idea here is to come up with a prompt like this one. So a political journalist, policy expert, and German voter walk into a Brussels bar on a Thursday night. What's
Sounds like
surprising?
part of a joke, right?
Yes, it's definitely part of the joke. But we like to create scenarios where we're challenging the AI to come up with answers that then we can use potentially in our work. And so the idea is to have a prompt with these three different audiences. So the political journalist, the policy expert, and the German voter, to talk about a surprising strength that they agree on that the Commission has, and then something Commission officials desperately need to hear. And so the answer is that the European Commission's surprising strength is high public trust. So the political journalist will say that people see them as the reliable crisis handler. The policy expert says that the Commission has delivered tangible wins, and the German voter says we trust them for the major challenges. So this is just a conversation starter. When you're using AI for the first time, is to understand what an audience might think about your organization. And so it's all about the details, the scenario, the context you're providing in these prompts to get the best insights.
Now, one overarching question is whether you are using AI or a course on AI, a webinar on AI. Is it about learning to prompt, or is it about improving your thinking? And we are very firm believers in the latter. A lot of people talk about prompt engineering. They talk about how to create the perfect prompt. And yeah, there is space for that. And those are more nuanced techniques. And some of it we will share with you and hopefully give you more ideas. But we are pretty keen on ushering you towards improving your thinking with AI. So not to substitute it, but supplement and stress test or pressure test your thinking with the help of AI tools.
And so we like to believe that with AI, we can solve much more complex problems because we can analyze more data, we can write text in a small amount of time, we can research a lot of different websites and different resources. But to do so, we need to ask deeper questions. And I want to share something that I've started doing when I started using AI, is to ask questions that I thought were deep, like, what am I doing with my life? And this is not really a very useful question because the AI systems or the AI tools that we use are trying to go in different directions to answer that specific question. And a much deeper question could be, based on everything you know about me, imagine what my next 5 years could look like with a list of impressive accomplishments. And then once done, I want you to create a program for you to help me accomplish my promising future. So this is just to say that when you're using AI tools, it's all about your intent, the goal that you're trying to reach, the context that you're providing to make sure that the AI has all the information it needs to go down the rabbit hole and help you ideally with a very positive answer.
Now, something that might be a little closer to your line of work, be that in the European Commission, be that in an EU agency, be that with the United Nations or international organization. Well, we tried to come up with an example that perhaps resonates more. So we took this prompt, again, in the same vein as Jacques has presented, not necessarily a good one, where I could say, well, summarize President von der Leyen's recent speech at the EU Ambassadors Conference, which took place quite recently. And that could be a fairly straightforward way of using AI, but a better one might be to give far more details. So we could say, well, read von der Leyen's speech, and we attach it as a PDF. We do not expect the AI tool to pick it up from secondary sources, from press reports, or it might pick up a version which was somewhat published, but it's not the one that was eventually delivered. So there are a lot of variables there. And if I want to be sure, I would rather take the text that I want to work with and attach it straight away. And then say, generate a detailed and comprehensive summary from a security and trade perspective. And again, we give it a very specific angle. I don't want just a generic summary. I want something that is helpful to me in my line of work or the kind of speech or briefing or project that I'm working on. And then research WTO current priorities, cross-check against the summary. And again, if it's relevant for my case, but I might want to contrast it with that particular position, and then say highlight three key subtopics to monitor moving forward. Now, this is a very loaded prompt, and certainly if we were to do it for real, we would not necessarily put everything in a single prompt, and I would cut it into pieces and take step by step. But this is just to say that a generic summary may not be the one that is the most helpful to you, but something that gives much more context. And again, we're looking at the prompt, but what essentially we're doing is giving more context as to who am I in the situation, what's my priority, and what do I want to do with this particular output.
So we're going to go into the practical AI use cases, but before that, we can mention a couple words on this thought experiment.
So the thought experiment is the Maslow pyramid, and we took it as a baseline to say, okay, what's the most straightforward way of using AI? Well, fun and entertainment, and you can create scenarios in a Brussels bar, and you can generate even put that input, the introduction with the three people walk into the bar, and then tell AI to generate a funny punchline in the end. But something that in our line of international policy and public policy work, more interesting, simple task execution. Essentially, all of you are doing some form of this proofreading summarization. The direction we want to encourage you to move towards is the workflow optimization, where you can put in 5 different stakeholder positions or policy papers or policy positions, and tell the AI to say, okay, give me a table comparing these and tell me what they agree on, what are the points that they completely disagree on, and what could be one line of position that seem to appeal to everyone. Or data analysis, you can feed in different Eurostat charts and say, well, here are the unemployment trends in Europe in the past 2 years. What sort of insights can we draw from that? And overlay that with information on say internal migration flows inside the EU, and then okay, what correlations can we discover between unemployment and people moving to another country, right? So that is a much better way, much deeper way of using AI. But the real added value is at the advanced problem solving bit, where we might challenge the assumptions we have, looking for blind spots, looking for a different way of solving a difficult policy challenge. And we can tell the AI, well, if you were the world's best policy analyst, or you can even give a name, how would you approach this problem? What sort of different take would you have when it comes to this particular issue to resolve? So we are essentially co-thinking with the AI. And the last bit is custom applications. European Commission has the GPT at EC, which is a custom version of the AI. There are more nuanced, more focused ones, note takers, internal tools, social media monitoring, policy trackers, and the like. And to showcase that, here's one that I have just launched. It's called Rhetora.ai. You're very welcome to sign up and try it out. It's a persuasion tool. It's finding virtual personas and groups, Gen Z, free market conservatives, environmental activists, all sorts of different groups, and test your message, how they would react, and what these virtual personas recommend you to change in the message so it resonates more with them. So basically, they have very rich profiles, and then you get a better idea of how can I persuade such audiences better, and what is it that I might need to pitch my message differently to appeal to those particular individuals or audiences. And then we have these communication frameworks, the Cialdini persuasion or Moral Foundations theory. And based on those principles, it gives you specific message recommendations, along with the possibility to chat with these personas. So again, this is a custom tool that is used for a very specific purpose.
And the first use cases we wanted to talk about is researching policy developments. And so we wanted to obviously invite you to provide more context when you're using AI tools and when you're trying to prompt better. And the first example we wanted to share is from, we'll see in the next slide, Andras, if you can so quickly go to the next one. We're using Perplexity for this example. And so the idea is to think about a sustainability policy officer at DG Environment at the European Commission, and to identify 3 EU policy trends likely to affect environmental impact assessment over the next 5 years. We're being very specific with what we're looking for, and we're giving it also a time frame. And then for each trend, describe specifically the policy change and explain why it matters for French farmers. Again, we're narrowing down the search to figure out why it's relevant and to describe even more this policy change. And then we really like to use the likelihood and impact to assess how impactful this change is going, or these changes are going to be, and then to present the findings in a table with a star system. And so here you have the 3 trends, the description, why it matters for French farmers, the likelihood and impact. But this is really good. But since we're all visual animals and we need to process information visually sometimes, it's good to have a table. But you can also use these AI tools to create diagrams or charts or any type of different formats that you want to better visualize the information. So here we ask for a diagram, and it's going to use basically or make assumptions about the likelihood and impact of these trends, and then put them on a diagram for you to assess which one is going to affect you the most and which one is most likely to happen.
And maybe just one more thing to add here, that we entirely relied on the AI's own assessment, what it considers likely, what it considers impactful. But this is something that you, perhaps as a subject matter expert or a policy expert or someone who's an analyst and really knows the topic inside out, you can be far more deliberate about it and say, hey, well, let's first just research, but then I want to assign certain scores or certain qualitative metrics or qualitative description to this particular issue, and then the AI will pick that up, and then you can visualize it in some way. So again, this is what we hinted at the very beginning when we said certain inaccuracies, because we're showcasing the potential of it. But if I were to do it really accurately as a subject matter expert, then we would go deeper, and we would likely use our own proprietary data. So if you are the commission, you have access to the GPT at EC, or you are working for an international organization that has a secure, trusted tool that you can use for AI data crunching, you can use sensitive information or internal information with that tool overlaid with external information that you had researched. And in the same vein, you can also forecast your impact or forecast shortcomings and trying to mitigate risks. So you could say, well, you're a comms director at the EU Drugs Agency crafting a 2025 messaging strategy. And you say, well, fast forward to 2029 from today, basically, 3 years from now, and say, okay, what 3 topics dominated the comms and why? Where did we drive measurable impact? What 3 messaging blunders cost us most? So you're doing a sort of pre-mortem, not a post-mortem, understanding what might go wrong so you can avoid those, or you can mitigate those risks. And then just as a cherry on that cake, propose 3 underused topics for 2030. So it helps you brainstorm new ideas. So again, the topics, 3 topics we talked about, where we made real change, 3 messaging mistakes, right? So again, it helps you visualize something that you might have an intuition about, but you don't necessarily, it's in your awareness. It's not necessarily, you know what exactly that is. And AI helps you unearth those risks or those possibilities. And again, 3 fresh topics, it would give you those ideas. So not as a broad brainstorming topic, but something that is far more relevant to your organization. Well, for our case, assuming you work in the EU Drugs Agency.
Then there's something we wanted to mention about the language that you might be using in your prompts. So is it better to use English or maybe a local language? And when you're using AI tools, it's always good to think about the language, the original language you're using, and the language that is also in potentially the results you can find. So The search language really matters. So make sure that when you're using AI tools that you're looking for information in that specific language. So it's really good to pick, for example, a local language. If you're looking for local news, local policies, and results from national media or experts. So whenever you're looking for specific regional or country-based results, it's always good to pick the language from that specific area.
An alternative to that might be that you instruct the AI to say, let's say, I think one of you mentioned you're in Slovenia. You say, well, I want to also find Slovenian language sources for my query, because you're looking up laws, or you're looking up maybe demographic trends, or anything where the local information is important, because in English it may not exist such comprehensively in English. So you explicitly tell the AI, look it up in this particular language and find those sources. That is usually a helpful way if you perhaps do not speak that language. Option B is that you formulate your query in English, you translate that into that target language with AI, feed the prompt into AI in that target language. You get the response probably in that language, which you probably do not understand in our hypothetical scenario, but then you translate that back into English. Now, it's a little cumbersome, and I haven't done experiments whether the first one or the second one works better. I would assume they're quite comparable. But again, you need to be very upfront and very specific, very explicit to look for information in a local language. And again, because the AI by default would not do that, right? Like it only does it if it's instructed explicitly, and then it finds those sources. Very straightforward. Make sure to run this request in Arabic, in Slovenian, in any other language, and use local sources from the country of your issue.
So something that we've seen that international organizations or EU agencies face usually is to finalize their report, or to finalize writing, to finalize documents. And so we like to think about doing a extreme critical review when you're trying to proofread or finalize a document. And to do so, we use a tool called Notebook LM, and it's a free tool from Google. It's a tool that is really effective at analyzing documents, summarizing documents, especially if they're very long, and especially if you have multiple documents to analyze. And so here I have uploaded a report from, I think it's the International Crisis Group. And so this tool really allows you to analyze it, to find specific insights in these documents. And so here I've tried to do many different things. I've asked this tool to create an infographic about the document. And so just in a couple seconds, you can easily see, even visually, what this document is about and some of the insights. But then I asked it to do a critical review. So I said, act like a detail-oriented critical policy manager at this organization and carefully review the report. And again, we're using specific words like carefully, because we want to force the AI system to focus on accuracy instead of speed. So carefully is a way to do so, like adding this word. And then I said, identify any flaws, factual inaccuracies, outdated data, logical gaps, unstated assumptions, biased framing. I'm basically trying to find everything that is wrong, negative, incorrect about this document, so then I can improve it down the line and finalize it so that it's ready to go. And then I've asked also for recommendations to improve this report. And it's easily came up with a few flaws and logical gaps that I can then assess. It's our responsibility then as experts to go through the AI results and see which one really makes sense and which one we shouldn't actually focus on. So I have all the different flaws and then the recommendations. So the things I need to adjust in writing for the specific documents. So we highly encourage you to use tools like Notebook LM to review documents, to assess how good they are, and to then potentially compare them with ongoing news or anything you can find online as well.
And just as a side note, obviously you can do it with your own document if you are willing to take that hit and get that feedback and willing to hear what the AI might highlight about the document. But you can definitely do it with your peers and with your, let's say, issue competitors. Let's put it this way: those that you really disagree with, that they put out a report and say, okay, you upload that into AI and say, well, tear it apart. Tell me where they are wrong. What assumptions are they making that are just not accurate, or something that doesn't hold up, and then you can counterclaim or come up with a counter argument. So moving on to the next one is a broader question: is what you can do when AI answers seem wrong, or they're missing details, or you are just simply unsure what had happened in that black box that you fed in some query, you got the response, and you're like, okay, why that doesn't seem right. Well, you can definitely challenge your AI tool, and you can say, well, explain in detail how you came up with these results, and share your blind spots with me. And again, that sounds a little strange to ask a machine, which is not really human and not really machine. It's somewhere in between, where blind spots, you don't ask your Excel sheet to tell me your blind spots in your formula. But AI being what it is, it's helpful and quite revealing when you say, okay, how did you get to this result? And then sometimes it can happen that it justifies something without actually revealing how it came about. So it finds plausible and convincing reasons how it came up with a certain result. But and because of that reason, it's often even better that you ask it upfront. So in your prompt, to say, research that information and then tell me how you came to or what you found, or what was the process through which you came to that result. But in here, it does a pretty good job, again, with the same report that Jacques mentioned with the crisis group, that says, okay, this is, I identified the Maduro capture, I scrutinized the introduction of this and that, perform coherence check. So it does reveal certain points as to how it came to that particular result. And the more interesting thing, at least for me, is the blind spots. When the AI, you basically push back against the AI and say, okay, well, tell me where you might be wrong, where you got that wrong. And this is helpful when you are relying on the AI to do certain analysis, certain information processing. When you're looking for facts or information, this might need to take a different form, because then you're essentially fact checking and verifying information. Here, it's, since the AI did some analytical slash thinking process, you are trying to find ways or identify of what assumptions, right or wrong assumptions, it had applied.
Another conversation we want to mention here is the fact that you need to classify the data that you might be using. So how do you think about data privacy when you're exchanging email addresses, information about your organization? So maybe the first level of data privacy, or the first type of data you should think about, is the public data. So publicly available data is data you can definitely use in your prompts. It's definitely data that you can use freely in anything you do with AI tools. Now, the next type of data is internal data, and internal data is a little bit more sensitive. So maybe for this, you need to use maybe approved tools and make sure that you're not revealing any sensitive information. Maybe here another way is to also think about also the settings you have in these AI tools and make sure that you're not revealing any sensitive information. Now, when it comes to confidential data, which is data that is very, very sensitive and very private, you should never try to input it in any AI tool, and make sure that it's fully anonymized and that this AI tool has the setting switched off to basically use your data to train its models. So when you're using AI tools, it's really good that to keep this in mind when it comes to classifying your data. So think about, am I using publicly available data that I can actually use freely? Am I using internal data that I should be maybe more cautious about? Or am I using confidential data that I should anonymize and definitely not input into AI results?
And there's a question that just came in, and I see the questions from Deborah. We'll address those regarding the hallucination, and the other one on tools that are good for content generation. So we'll come back to it in a second. But this one is immediately related to what Jacques has just presented, which is, are there approved tools to check sensitive information? Well, I mean, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg, where if it's sensitive information, you probably do not want to load it into any tool whatsoever, because it might be so sensitive as to it shouldn't even enter into that tool. But in terms of often it's your critical judgment and your understanding, and you can remove personally identifiable information or anything that's really sensitive. And then if you have a trusted internal tool, then you can use that to scrutinize what might be sensitive. And again, you need to have a very high degree of trust in that particular tool to vet the information that you feed in. That is especially, it could be an interesting use case to say you basically sanitize information that it would not be identifiable about the organization, but it still provides enough description of the problem you're trying to solve or the background information you're trying to use. And you kind of clean it in a way that you can use an external tool, right? So it's always your judgment as to what information can go into which tool. And talking about the tools, so the GPT at EC, the European Commission's tool, but other organizations tend to have their own well-configured systems. And the many organizations we have worked with over the many workshops and months that we are dealing with this topic, we've seen that an increasing number of organizations would have Copilot on the Microsoft ecosystem, or Gemini, which is the Google tool if they run on the Google systems. And those have the right safeguards, both from a legal and an IT perspective, to be trusted enough that you can use. But the general rule of thumb is that you are well advised to have a good central hub, a central tool that you can put both external stuff and the sensitive internal data as well, and you can overlay it. You can have best of both worlds, where you can do a perplexity search, a deep research on, let's say, what are the trends in, let's say, nuclear energy adoption in Europe. And then it does a deep research. It gets lots of 30, 40, 50 different sources and collates that into a helpful document. And then you pull that into your internal tool and overlay it with the proprietary information and the proprietary data, briefings or other background documents that you have, and then use the power of AI to generate a briefing, to create a policy report, to do a speech for your boss, or social media content.
Another use cases we wanted to share here is preparing high-level meetings. So this is something you might be focusing on. And we have a couple tips here, is to use online profiles to anticipate questions. So if you're preparing a meeting with a high-level official, and to use frameworks to be more persuasive. So we're going to show you exactly how the sausage is made here with these two examples. So here the focus is on being a public affairs officer at Acer, preparing your director for a meeting with a chief sustainability officer. And so the idea here is to ask the AI to draw from this person's online profile, recent news, and this person's potential publications for the past year, and then to identify 3 discussion hooks that will lead sort of this meeting, anticipate 3 tough questions, and then provide responses based on Cialdini's persuasion principles. So if some of you might know, Cialdini is really the leader, or sort of the guru when it comes to persuasion principles. And so it's really good sometimes to use frameworks from books, movies, or anything you can read, to use these frameworks in your prompts so that the AI system knows what you view as a quality result, and then create basically a briefing memo that is 400 words, again, giving more context as to what the briefing memo looks like. Then the AI tool will come back with 3 discussion hooks for this meeting. Hooks that are also supported by sources, online sources, because the AI tool is doing some research on what would be relevant for this meeting. And then the tool will also anticipate 3 questions that your executive or your director might be facing during this meeting. And so it's really key here that when you're preparing a meeting is to think about what can go wrong, what could not go wrong, and how to also respond to these things. And here you have 3 responses that are based on Cialdini's principles of scarcity, authority, consistency, and consensus liking. So you can use that framework. It could be a different framework like Harvard negotiation techniques. You can use different types of framework to improve the quality of your documents as you're preparing for a big meeting.
And there's a question that just came in. To what extent do we know whether AI provides results based on internal or confidential data from other people? Well, it doesn't provide answers from, let's say, if it's a public tool, it's not going to pick up certainly those things unless someone has the train the model for everyone setting turned on, which is something you can all do in the configuration of Gemini, of Copilot, of all the others. Whether your data might train the algorithm, it doesn't mean it feeds all the data into it, but it picks up certain patterns that makes the algorithm go better. But again, if you're inside your organization that you have an AI tool, then there will be certain walls, so to say, in digital terms, where the way you use the AI tool will not necessarily kind of carry over to another department or directorate general or other parts of the organization would use it. It's ultimately a question of settings as to how the training internally happens. And then another interesting use case is considering new perspectives. So we would take this example that you're a strategic advisor to the Institute for European Environmental Policy, and you say, well, pressure test the most recent online activity from 3 perspectives. You could say a pragmatic policy officer, vocal climate activist, a skeptical journalist. But you might as well say, to say, okay, how would Emmanuel Macron view this particular issue? How would the Bulgarian prime minister look at this particular issue? You can say a person or an individual or even an institution that has enough information about them online. Well, you can take them as a vantage point, a perspective, and say, how would they view this particular issue? And here, okay, present that in a table, and then it gives you that particular thing. Now, again, a pragmatic policy officer might be a little too broad or too vague, or vocal climate activist can be understood in so many ways, or a skeptical journalist. So if you want to be more specific, you probably want to create that vantage point, that persona, if you will, with a bit of research, and then say, okay, someone with this particular view, with this particular stance, with this particular attitude, how would they look at our policy paper? So you can stress test it, and you can be proactively reinforcing it so it will hold up to more scrutiny. And then it would give you the extended recommendations of what else you can do to reinforce your particular message. And this kind of brings us towards the end. And I see, so there were these 2 questions which Deborah was asking. So I'll leave this slide on for a second. These are a curated list of free resources, and not free, but tools that we have come across. Some we mentioned, like Notebook LM, or 11 Labs is an audio and voice agent generator service. Gamma, beautiful. They do slide decks. Granola is a note taker. So there are many, many more. But to answer the question of hallucination, that you need to monitor a large number of sources and decisions, and you are concerned about what it might come up. Now, one immediate thing is, if you set up a recurring task for Copilot or in Perplexity, it's called tasks, or in ChatGPT, it has its own system. So for instance, give me a daily rundown of news of what's happening on climate policy in Southeast China, right? Like that could be, there's a geographic focus, there's a policy focus, and you just want to have a broad understanding of horizon scanning. And you say, okay, I need that in 10 bullet points, and I need you to use high quality sources. And for each bullet point, I want to know the source where it was taken from. So by you specifying to the AI tool to provide you the specific source of an information, it usually absolutely minimizes the hallucination, often even completely eliminates it. The same way that you want to do a summary of a document, you say, well, give me the exact paragraph from which you took this particular summary point. It's going to really look at that paragraph and provide you with the link or with the reference. And then you can, first of all, cross-check it. But second of all, you may not even need it, because it will do such a good job by you very specifically instructing. It's a bit like telling a student to say, well, I'm going to verify everything that you do, and the fact of knowing that they're going to be verified will improve the quality of their work because they know that it's going to be cross-checked.
Yeah, and I think the second part of Deborah's question is about struggling with hallucinations and coming up with seeing AI come up with fake content, which forces me to read all the content in the level of detail that I was trying to avoid. So it's true that sometimes you might get some big hallucinations when you're using AI tools. So we would really encourage you to either look at your settings in terms of the tools that you might be using to make sure that you're minimizing hallucinations. You might also want to improve the prompts that you're providing to provide more specifics. There's also in some tools ways for you to create spaces or projects where you can upload specific documents that are going to direct the specific tool. Maybe another suggestion is to use tools that are more focusing on RAG, so retrieval augmented generation. I know it's a difficult word to pronounce, but basically it's a tool that's not necessarily going to go online to find information and potentially hallucinate. It's usually tools that are more focused on the documents that you provide. It's only going to look at the documents that you provide to give you an answer. So for example, Notebook LM is one of those. So Notebook LM tends to have fewer hallucinations because it's not trying to extrapolate or find information that are not in the document itself, right? So thinking about the settings, the prompts, and the specific tools that you use can hopefully help you reduce hallucinations down the line.
And an interesting twist could be that to the end of your prompt where you say, okay, this is the kind of rundown of news I need, you put into the end to say, once you're done with the whole compilation, turn yourself or act like a very critical newspaper editor, go through everything that you've put out there and completely take out the ones that do not hold up to scrutiny. So essentially you're telling the AI that now you're wearing this hat, but now you're wearing another hat. And with the second hat, you basically self-verify, and that in and by itself often improves the output significantly. And just to close it down and with the takeaways, is generally we are very keen on emphasizing the importance of providing more context. So be that data or background documents, general maybe style guide if you're in a comms role, or a briefing template if that's your line of work, to say, well, this is what I'm looking for in your output, and then it's going to be significantly better. And avoiding using personal data to the degree possible. The vast number of queries will work well without the personal data, even if it's just a broad description or anonymized. Asking deeper questions as asking better questions, or even you can tell the AI, this is the problem I want to solve. What would be a better way of looking at it? Is it the right problem to solve? Am I going in the right direction? So very open-ended, very kind of self-reflective questions. And use AI as a thinking partner to say, well, what am I missing? What are my blind spots? What are the points that I may not have picked up? Or what are my own biases that may skew the results that I'm looking at? And then stating the problem versus giving instructions, you can say, well, help me draft a speech. Well, that's an instruction, and then it's going to deliver on it, and you can give lots of details. But perhaps you say, my goal is to emphasize this particular message to this particular audience. What is the best way to go about it? And it might say, well, you can give a speech, or you can use slide deck, or you can invite people for one-on-one meetings. So essentially, you're not saying the very practical one, but the higher level problem solving that you're looking at. And then the final bit is to encourage you to keep experimenting. These are principles and methods that are fairly straightforward and relatively easy to understand, but it requires back and forth and practice to see how it works out. And I see that there are one or two more questions which we're going to aim to answer in the remaining 1 or 2 minutes. But Jacques, if you want to say a word about our workshops, and then we get back to the questions from Claudia and the other one that's still unanswered from Deborah.
Yeah, so just quickly, obviously, if you have any questions, if you have any needs inside your team, if you're trying to understand how you can apply AI to your work, so if you're looking for best practices, some examples of use cases to expand your mindset when it comes to AI tools, And if you simply want to improve the accuracy and the privacy when you're trying to use specific tools, then feel free to reach out. We'll share a link to our website, and we'll be happy to continue the conversation. We're going to now tackle the remaining questions. So Andras, maybe you can have a look. There's a first question that we haven't answered about why is cut-up prompts better than one loaded prompt?
Well, the reason is that the AI is a little akin to a human in that sense that it might not go so deep if it's given too many instructions at any given time. So if I'm told, hey, go to IKEA, I go to IKEA. That's all I need to keep in mind. The next instruction I get is, okay, look for the aisle about chairs. Then I look for the aisle about chairs. But if I get 15 steps to say, do this, do that, I might overlook one, or I might not go so deep in one or the other. Now, especially if you're doing research or gathering information as part of your overall task, it's usually better to separate that, because then you can give far more details, and then you have kind of the baseline. And then comes the next thing: what do I do with it? How do I repackage it? How do I repurpose it? So that's why, again, it's always a cost benefit. Is it worth my time? Is it an important task? Or all I need is proofreading or shortening a text? And just to add to that, I see that there's a question about proofreading. DeepL, so DEEP, like deep, profound, so deep and L in the end. That's a German tool, good at proofreading all translation tasks, and now they are even increasing the scope of their services. That's really good. But most AI tools do a pretty good job at proofreading. Whether it's stylistic, some might be better than others. So Claude.ai tends to write better. Other tools, but if it only comes to the grammar and the punctuation and all that, most tools are really good at that. Jacques, you want to address Deborah's other question about matching style and organizations' brand guidelines?
Yes, I think that's a good question. Probably a good tool. I think we really encourage you to experiment with these tools. I think if you do have a specific prompt, if you have, for example, a project or a space that you create in a specific tool that you're using, if you're creating a custom GPT, for example, these are great ways to sort of combine all these documents and then create content based on those documents. So it really depends on the prompts that you're using, the tools that you're using, and to make sure basically that the tool understands your perspective, your context, your organization's brands, guidelines, and then creates something that's more in line with that.
And just to back that up, you can upload all of that, obviously. And even in Canva, you can create all those brand things if you are more in the image generation. But even in ChatGPT, you can upload a sample and say, here's an infographic that we have put out, or here's even a social media post, and you can feed it in as a screenshot, upload that and say, this is a social media post we're very happy about. Replicate the style and the language and everything else about it, and generate a new post about a completely different topic. And I did that sort of experiment a couple months ago, again, uploading a friend of mine's very characteristic writing style, 4 or 5 articles. I put that into a Google Doc, turned it into a PDF, uploaded it into ChatGPT, and said, well, pick up the cues, the style, and then generate a new post about a completely different topic. And it did a pretty good job. So it's much more specific and much more on brand for your organization. With that, there might have been 1 or 2. Yes, I can see there's Adrian, a question. Any chance giving AI workshops to create visuals? Yeah, I mean, we do all sorts. So happy to discuss. So please reach out to us, and we will give you our response as to how we could be helpful on the image generation. I think it's a fascinating area. I've also experimented with video generation and put out some animated AI videos and other visuals. So happy to discuss. So in respect of everyone's time and the promised 45 minutes, we added 1 or 2 just to be sure we cover all questions. Thank you so much for being here, and a big thanks to Sonia for helping us out with support. And to be continued, feel free to reach out, and we'll be happy to follow up with the conversation.
Thank you so much for joining, and let's continue the conversation online on our website or on LinkedIn if you're active on the platform.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.